Alright, this is part 2 of the Panton chair tutorial. So in the last video we showed you how to place the images. Now we're going to draw all the curvature that will be lofted together. So remember that we want to get both of these images in the same layer. So if we go in perspective, we see that there's two images. This is basically where we're going to generate our geometries from. And we want to set them both to the default layer. So to do that, we select both images, right click on the default layer, and just say change object layer. You probably already did that anyway in your first video. Now we're going to make a new layer, or in my case, since I already have these 5 layers already added, I'll just go ahead and use them since they're just here. So to make a new current layer, basically the layer that we are going to be drawing with at that moment in time, we just double click the layer, it highlights, and we see a little check mark here. So let's begin drawing the curvature. We're going to start with the curve that is basically the outermost edge. Now remember, with a NURBS curve, we are not going to be actually clicking very many points because we want to basically create a curve that can be easily adjusted with these interpolated points. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. Another thing that we just want to make sure that we do is change the thickness of the curve. So let's go to options, and then there should be one that says view here, and then under view there should be display modes, and then under display modes wireframe, under wireframe objects, and then we get to curves. So let's make sure we set that to at least 2 or 3. By default it's set to 1. That's going to let us see our curves a little bit easier. So I'll just set mine to 3. Alright, now let's begin drawing. So let's start with this command called interp CRV. That's a curve with interpolated points. So I'll just, before I begin tracing here, I'll just show you kind of what this will be doing. Instead of making a series of straight lines, when we select one point and then select another point, you can see that the line then begins arching through the points. And in the case of an interpolated curve, it's a little bit difficult to change direction. Basically, to do that, you have to, in a way, select one point which changes the orientation of the curve, and then select a second point to actually change the direction of the curve. This is kind of what makes it a little bit tricky, but it's just something that's going to take a little bit of practice when drawing, because you'll be clicking on one line and then the arch will end up being way off the line. But we'll be able to adjust this all in a second. So let's go ahead and begin. Let's repeat that command, interp curve. And make sure to start a little bit under the line. This is just because at the end of drawing all the curves, we're going to trim off the excess. That way everything is flush to this bottom line. So let's start around here. And now we just begin drawing not too many points. We just have to roughly, also make sure to turn snap off, sorry. We just want to make sure that we draw roughly through the points that make up this outer edge. So as you can see here, this curve is not going to be perfectly straight, but we'll adjust that later on. We make our way up. And now, as you can see, we don't actually see the line. That's because this image is it's basically set in front of the line. So in order to adjust that, let's click on this actual image. And we can see in perspective that the line that we just drew is actually behind the image. And let's just move the image backwards so that we can then see the line. And we can also go ahead and lock that layer in which our images are on so we don't accidentally click on it. Alright, so now let's get back to the front view. So I did a pretty good job actually of going through the points and making sure that I went past that bottom line ever so slightly. If I wanted to make some adjustments, I just have to change the points within this interpolated curve. So in order to turn the points on, we hit the command P on, and then we select the object that we want to edit and hit enter. So now as you can see, it shows the true nature of the way these curves are working. So remember, NURBS curves are more forming a network of points in which the line sort of goes in between these points. Basically, the points are more viewed as constraints, and then how far off the point is something that you can adjust later on in the settings of the actual interpolated curve itself. So I want to just adjust this top curve a little bit. So I just highlight that point, and then with my gumball tools, I can just move it down a little bit. I can adjust this point to make it a little bit curvier. And then to turn the points off, you just hit escape a few times and then they turn off. Alright, so now let's change layers. We'll go to this purple layer. Now we're going to draw this middle, basically the underside of the chair, which actually ends up becoming the middle of our final product. So let's repeat the command interp curve. Remember, we want to start a little bit past that bottom line. And in this case, I'm a little bit off, but I'm going to adjust this curvature later on. And now you don't actually see this, but this line kind of goes a little bit past this outer edge, because that's this outer edge kind of dips below the bottom, basically the seat where your bottom goes, and then it picks up in this line back over here. So then once you get up to about this point, then you can go ahead and meet up. If we turn on our O snaps, we can go ahead and meet up with the, and maybe we want to actually turn on our nearest, dun dun dun, and just kind of go along this curve now. Something like that. So let's make these adjustments. As you can see, it doesn't look so pretty. So we highlight the object and type in P on, and now we can just make our adjustments. If you feel you have too many curves, or too many points, I should say, you can always just highlight and delete one. It will change, basically, it'll interpret, if I deleted this point, it'll approximate where that curvature would sort of end up in between these 2 points now. Like, watch, if I delete this point, it now made an adjustment, a pretty big adjustment, which actually I'll go ahead and keep that, because the less points we have, the better in the case of this chair. Remember how under here it's just something that you kind of have to, you'll see when we actually loft these together, this will make a little bit more sense. And actually, let's just go ahead and turn on points on for both of these. And now we can kind of just snap these points onto the other points. Like so. So now the curvature follows directly along that path. I can also adjust this point. Sorry, that was for the red curve. Oh, actually, it's fine. If I wanted to insert a control point, like if I wanted to get one kind of to go, oh, I see, this one was for the purple curve. All right, then let's just go ahead and delete this guy. Cool. Okay, that's what was making us making this not work so well. All right, so now the purple curve kind of goes along there. But as I was saying before, if I wanted to add a control point, I can just type in the command insert control point, and then it'll ask me what point I want to add it to, and then as you can see, we can place it anywhere in the path of the curve itself, and then Rhino will sort of figure out where how the geometry kind of goes in between. So if we type in points on, you'll see it's on the point in this case. So that's how you insert a control point. In this case, I don't want to do that. I want to do it how I had it beforehand. Alright, so now we want to just go ahead and draw the last curve, which is this outer edge. So let's go ahead and make a new layer. and we'll do the interp curve. And now we're going to go as we did before. Let's turn off our O snaps. Now we want to just go ahead and go along the curvature as seen in in the images. And we're actually going to stop short probably about like right here. Basically where this outer edge and that middle edge intersect in the elevation is kind of where we want to stop it. And now we can make our adjustments. So we'll move this up a little bit. We can bring this down. And the rest looks pretty good. All right. So now we want to adjust these in the front elevation. So let's go to the front elevation, and we're having the same problem as we did before. So let's go ahead and unlock our background layer. And let's move this behind all the curves that we drew. So that it looks something like so. Alright, and we can lock that image layer again. Alright, so now in the front elevation, all these curves that we just drew, they're on top of each other. So now we have to place them in the right path according to the front elevation. So first we're going to go ahead and place where the middle edge, since that's relatively easy to locate here on the chair, it's just the middle of the chair. So we click on what's going to be our middle lofted curve, which is the purple one, and let's move it over. So we just select it, type M for move, and let's go ahead and turn our O snaps off. And we just have to move it, hold down shift so that it locks into the ortho. And let's just get it somewhere relatively here in the middle. About right there. Should be pretty good. Now we want to adjust where the red curve is going to go. Basically, the red curve represents the topmost point of the Panton chair itself. So that's going to be basically met up with this line, and then the top point kind of goes somewhere around this direction. You can't see it in the front elevation, but just watch how I do it and it'll make a little bit more sense. So we'll go ahead and select the red curve and move it basically to where it intersects with this second line. Kind of about right there. Now we want to start making adjustments, and we can go ahead and expand the front viewport. Now we're going to be making adjustments of the actual points so that they go along the curvature of our elevations. So let's go ahead and type P on. And now we see all the points that we drew that were basically the top portion of that chair. We want to be able to move those down so that they kind of hit a little bit more along this intersection right here. So we just have to gumball this down. Kind of to about right there, so. And now it looks fine in in the elevation, but watch what happens when we look at the side elevation. It's going to be like adjusted a little way off. So let's fix that by typing P on again. Let's move these over and get them back along the original placement. There's a little bit of back and forth that's going to be going along with adjusting these curves. Back and forth, I mean between the right elevation and the front elevation. We're just trying to kind of massage it all so that it works. So now we have to just make sure that it still works in the front elevation. Looks good there. Alright, so now let's go ahead and start working on the blue curve. So let's repeat turning the points on, P on. Now we're going to be sort of molding it to this curvature, this outermost curvature edge. Try to get it as approximate as we can. We won't be able to get every little detail, like especially this sort of harsh dip here, but we can at least move along what we do see. So this piece goes along here. I see. We want to make some pretty significant moves to be able to get this into the right placement. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, but trying to get it as close as possible will yield a better final result. Actually, that's pretty okay on this end. Let's see what that looks like in the side elevation. Yeah, not too many major bumps, actually. So, yeah, it looks good here, and it goes along the curvature. Now let's just adjust the the red curve a little bit nicer so that it kind of goes along this, what would be kind of like an imaginary edge that then meets back up with the curvature of the top ridge of the chair. So let's turn our points back on. And now we want to adjust it so that it kind of goes along. If you can imagine this line that is drawn in the elevation continuing upwards, that's kind of what we're adjusting our curvature now to. Make some adjustments here. This is where it starts getting a little weird because this point in the elevation looks like it's dipping downward, but it's actually going to be fine, because in the side elevation, it's just that point is kind of dipping low, to account for how the armrest of the chair kind of dips downward. Okay. And let's make sure that we are doing all right in our right elevation. So let's go back and type P on. Actually, we're not too far off. This might have to dip up a little bit. We can adjust this. Actually, I'm not too far off, so that's pretty good. Okay, so now we have these placed roughly in the right location to be able to make our Panton chair. However, as you can see, if I turn off the background layer a little bit, as you can see, what we're going to end up doing is lofting these lines together, essentially trying to create a surface that goes through all of these points, or through all of these lines as our sections, you could think of in a way. However, some of the lines are not relatively close to each other. Basically, Rhino is going to be guessing at the geometry that is made between this point and this point. So we want to try to account for as much as we can to help Rhino out in getting this to be exactly the way that we kind of wanted. So let's turn back our background on. And we're actually going to copy this middle curve over by about 5. So if we click and type in the units that we want to copy away from that point, if we hold down shift, now it can lock into the ortho, and now we're moving 5 units in whatever direction that we move our mouse in. So in this case, we want to move it 5 units to the left. And now we can adjust this a little bit to adjust for the curvature on top of here. There we go. So we don't have this flat curve, or this like flat edge. We have more of a curvature that gently slopes downward. And we want to go ahead and copy this over to the right, maybe about 3. Sorry. 3. Hold down shift to lock it. There we go. And we'll make sure that it lines up with this point up here. So we type in our P on, which is points on. Adjust that group of points upward. And now let's also go ahead and adjust the, if we turn off the background image, let's also move these bottom few points a little bit backwards so that it can account for meeting up with this point over here nicer. So we can just move these backwards like so, and then kind of straighten them out relative to each other. Remember, we don't want it to look too rigid. We want there to be kind of like a flowy transition going between them. So make sure that these aren't too different from the curvature that you already have drawn. And let's, just for good measure, turn back our background layer. Yeah, that's what I thought. So these need to just be moved backwards so that they can meet up with the rest of the points. Okay. So now we have basically the framework of making our Panton chair. In the next video, I'll show you guys how to connect all these lines together and then mirror it to generate the second half of the Panton chair.